Okay, we are now live. My name is Justin Lurie. Welcome to the Republicans of Houston Facebook show. I am sitting with a man who is the very symbol of honor, symbol of patriotism, valor, sacrifice, persistence, all those things. He is a man, when he goes on vacation, he brings nothing more than a pocket knife, 2 matches, and a rendezvous point in 7 days. His name, of course, is Dan Crenshaw. He is our Navy SEAL, and he is our GOP candidate to win the Republicans. I'm sorry, I said it wrong. How many times did I say that too? To win our 2nd congressional district. So, Dan, thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is gonna be fun. I'm excited about it.
Thank you, Sydney. All right, I have the live feed here. So I will read questions and comments as they come in. So if you have questions, do let us know. And if you hear some barking outside, that's because Dan's dogs have joined us here in Dan's office. Fair enough.
They're adorable. Okay, big tough Navy SEALs. We have small little dogs. Sometimes it's okay. I admit it. And they're great.
That is funny. I
just own it. I own it right away. Because in the SEAL teams, I get made fun of for this a lot. And you just got to own it.
I wasn't going to say anything, but now I will. Dan's dogs are the little lap dogs that you could maybe fit in Dan's little purse.
We rescued them from a shelter.
From Tara's purse.
How can you?
All right. So we're going to go over some things that you may not know about Dan. And I have to say, I've known Dan pretty well now for at least 8 months?
Yeah, since
something
November,
like that.
December. It's our first time sitting next to each other at a forum. We're always seated next to each other.
This is very, very, we're used to this. We're always sitting next to each other, talking. We're going to talk about some really interesting things. For example, Dan, we all know, was born in Texas. Many generations of his family is in Texas, but...
Actually, I'm going to
please correct me.
Correct the record on that. I was born in Scotland. So my dad's in the oil and gas industry, and everybody in the oil and gas industry knows Aberdeen, Scotland is one of our mainstays. So my parents were actually living overseas when I was born. My family goes back about 6 generations here in Texas, but and I actually don't have any memories of Scotland because I grew up here. But yeah, Aberdeen, Scotland. I want to say Scottish and Texans have quite a few similarities. I think there was multiple Scotsmen on signers of the Declaration of Independence. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of combined history, and we both rebelled against the English. So there's a lot of shared history there.
Not so bad. Who is your favorite team in the World Cup? This past couple
I didn't
weeks.
Watch a single game.
Oh,
if the U.S. isn't in it, it was hard for me to get really passionately interested on a specific team. So my heart wasn't in it. My heart wasn't in it, unfortunately. But I always watch Team USA. But it was a little devastating to me that they weren't in it. I played soccer here in the Katy area growing up. So I've always followed soccer very closely. I remember remember going up to Dallas when the World Cup was here in 1994. Mm-hmm. Got to see Netherlands versus Brazil, a very infamous game. It was one of my favorite memories. But I didn't watch it this year.
I only asked because I was rooting for England, and you
would.
I would. I used to live in England. All right. So you're born in Scotland. We know you travel the world with the Navy. But where else in your youth with your dad in the oil industry did you live?
Egypt. So I don't really have a lot of memories of Egypt either. Again, like very young, and then we were quickly back in Houston. So spent a year in Ecuador throughout middle school, and then actually just about all of high school I was in Bogota, Colombia. That's where I learned to speak Spanish. So I got kind of my first feel for what it was like to live abroad and just be immersed in a totally different culture. But great experience. I actually took my wife back to Colombia last year.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Now, what is the best part about growing up overseas?
I mean, you just come away with a very different perspective. I mean, obviously I can point out a couple obvious things like learning a different language. Okay, you learn a lot of different things about a different culture. You have very different experiences. Our class trips, because we had a very small class. It's a small, American system private school.
Was it in English or Spanish?
It was in English. I had to take. So they have an interesting system there. It's not like you're a lot. Again, I know we're talking to a lot of people who are in the oil and gas industry, and they've probably lived abroad a lot of places. living in Bogota was not your typical expat school, where it's primarily Americans or maybe even Canadians and British. I was the only American in my grade who was there the entire 4 years, and so it was quite a different experience. Okay, because I'd lived in Ecuador, and that was very much an American school. Bogota was not, because it was quite dangerous at the time. There wasn't a lot of expats there.
What year is this? Give me
This is 98 to 2002. So this was a time when you couldn't leave the city.
So it's like Narcos.
It's not quite like Narcos. So, Narcos is based in the early 90s to mid 90s.
The show on Netflix, by the way.
Yeah.
The show on Netflix, if you don't know it.
But I would say Narcos is a really well done show.
Mm-hmm.
I sat down with Senator Ted Cruz a couple months back, and he asked me a lot of questions, but one of his main questions was, is Narcos accurate? He was and it is. But you learn a lot. You get some cool experiences.
Doesn't he have any knowledge as a senator to find out what the accuracy is?
But I think the question is, okay, is the Spanish accurate? Is the Spanish that they speak accurate? And the answer is yes. These Colombian actors, is the scenery accurate? And I think the answer again is yes. I think they're actually in Medellin when they're filming these things, or at least somewhere in Colombia. It's very obvious that they're, to me at least, that they're actually on set down in Colombia. So it's a great show. I like the way it's done. Nothing irks me. You want to get to something that irks me? Mm-hmm. When in movies or shows, like the characters are foreign, but they're speaking English in their own foreign accent.
Yes,
doesn't that drive you crazy?
Like Sean Connery in Hunt for Red October.
Yeah,
he's speaking,
why don't you just speak
in Russian?
Yeah.
And then he speaks Russian with a Scottish Russian accent and English.
Yes, you got to. So Narcos realizes that and they just go full Spanish.
Full Spanish.
So I think it's the right way to do it.
This way I can watch with my son because he doesn't read subtitles.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm just kidding, Elizabeth, if you're watching. All right, so then after high school, you decided to go to a school, a very liberal arts school, if you call it.
Whoa.
I'm throwing stones. Tufts. You went to Tufts. Good school up in Boston. How did you decide to travel up to where the Yankees live?
Well, to be fair, the Yankees are in New York, okay? Boston Red Sox. So you're from New York, all right?
I'm from New York.
Yeah. let's just set the record straight.
Let's call the apple.
Yeah.
New York. Okay.
I kind of ended up at Tufts because of its international relations program. That was my main focus. I did a major in international relations. I did a minor in physics. I don't know why, because I was a nerd and it seemed like the right thing to do, and I enjoyed that. But Tufts is one of the premier international relations schools. That's a long story short. That's sort of how it ended up. My real focus, my real goal was to join the Navy. So that was whether it was through ROTC or the Naval Academy. I had always wanted to join the Navy since I was maybe 10 or 11. I read a book about the Navy SEALs, and that was it for me.
I thought you were going to say because of Top Gun, which would have been a fair. That's more my generation, I guess.
Well, it's same. So there's two movies, right, in the 80s: Top Gun and Navy SEALs.
I don't remember Navy SEALs.
Charlie Sheen.
Oh, that's okay.
Come on, man.
All right, I
Charlie Sheen,
stand corrected.
Bill Paxton.
All right, so how old were you when you first said I want to become a Navy SEAL?
I would say it was hard to say. 10 or 11, maybe 12.
And did you focus from that point and kind of made your path with that angle? It's kind of like our friend Dr. John Spires. John told me at a young age he wanted to become a heart surgeon, and he wanted to work with specific doctors at a specific hospital. And he made his entire path, and he was an early teenager, to be all the way through there, and he achieved it. So I guess that's kind of my question. Is that the same concept?
It is. You get that childhood dream and just laser focused on that. There's certain questions that arise. Do you just join out of high school? Mm-hmm. Do you go to college? It seemed like a pretty good deal to me that I would get an ROTC scholarship. You get your college paid for, and then you get commissioned as an officer on your way out. It's a question anybody joining the military needs to ask themselves. Do you want to go as an enlisted man or enlisted woman, or as an officer? Mm-hmm. There's pros and cons to both. We won't get into the details now, especially in the SEAL teams. It's just something you always ask yourself. I wanted to be an officer. I wanted to lead men into battle. That's just something I always wanted to do. I wanted to be in charge to a degree. So, and that's what we did. I mean, every little thing that I did was focused on that, whether it was, the type of workouts you do, or, the type of, trying to get good grades in college because you're applying to another program afterwards.
Speaking of workouts, before this, Dan and I got together early this morning, and I'm sitting in a chair, and I'm very, very happy to sit in a chair because we did a little bit of, let's call it SEAL training this morning.
That was not SEAL training.
Yeah, it was. I'm going to tell you something. It felt like it to me. That was intense. That was hard.
We didn't do the workout we said we were going to do.
And I'm not going to do it again. We didn't do the workout we said we're going to do because it just was not going to happen.
It's not the cards. It was not the cards.
I would have liked to for my own gratification.
Fun.
It was fun.
A great body
experience. Next time we're going to play basketball and call it even. Yeah. All right, so listen about SEAL training.
We're never going to play basketball. Let's just put that on the record right now. I don't have depth perception.
It's true.
It's not fair.
We're probably not playing tennis either.
Yeah.
Okay, so your SEAL selection process to be invited into the team there. Oh, there are those dogs.
The dogs are trying to get in the door.
The little dogs are in the door. What was the most, it's not the hardest thing, right? We always hear about that in documentaries. But what was the most surprising part of that process for you?
Oh, surprising. I'm going to answer the hard question first, because it's different for everybody. It depends on what your strengths and weaknesses are. But surprising, it's hard to say what is surprising because
just for you.
Actually,
I'll anticipated this for years.
I'll give you. Okay, so I think the chafing. The chafing is the only thing. It's the only unknown terror of buds. So by chafing, I mean, because you're always wet and you're wearing these BVUs, it's battle dress uniforms, fatigues, and they're always wet and they're always sandy. So what does that create? It creates sandpaper all around your body, all the time.
Oh.
And doing something like throughout the first 3 weeks of buds, where you are wet and sandy all the time, boats on heads, you're carrying logs around, you're doing everything torturous that they can possibly think of. Because there's sort of breaks and that you're not going into the night every single night, you avoid the chafing. But during Hell Week, it's a very different story. It's constant. It's 24/7. So that is the unknown terror. I mean, people still have scars actually, usually in the inner thighs and arms and things like that. And here under the arms, it's absolutely terrible.
Is that anything like what my grandfather used to tell me about when he was in the Pacific? He would get jungle feet. Or jungle toes or whatever.
That's different.
It's a little different.
That's different. So we avoid that by wearing the right boots, and they just didn't have access to those kind of boots back then.
Right.
Basically, boots that drain. Okay, so I think jungle foot is a very different thing, and that stems from not changing your socks out enough. So in buds, they'll try to avoid. They don't want you to get unhealthy, right? So it's like an interesting mix of just driving your body into the ground constantly. And once it's driven into the ground, they make you take 10 more steps. It's you truly find your limits. So actually, what you discover is that there are no limits. It can just go forever if you're mentally willing to do that. But they really want to avoid you getting sick, infected, or any of those things. So to make sure to change out your socks, to make sure to keep you fed, to make sure to keep you hydrated.
It sounds like the Ritz.
Sounds like the Ritz.
It's
kind of like the Ritz.
They don't kill you, but they push you. All right.
Yeah, it's totally the same.
So let's talk about. Sounds like a vacation I would take.
Yeah. It's a beautiful beach. It's one of the most beautiful beaches in America.
Oh, down in San Diego.
Yeah.
What can you share about the overall missions? Just the big goal. Not the individual small ones, but the overarching vision goal that you experienced for your years as deploying.
Yeah, so this is important because people are always asking. So we're going to get a little bit policy question. I'm going to try and adapt that to giving people an insight into what it's like to deploy overseas. On the 30,000 foot view on the policy side, okay, the fundamental reason we are over there, because we always get asked this, why not just bring the troops home? What are we even doing over there? That's the question. Whether you're on the left or on the right, that's the question you always hear. The fundamental easy answer is we are there so that they don't come here. Mm-hmm. It's just that easy. And because when you leave a vacuum of power, they will come here. We found that out in 9/11, and we find that out again with the rise of ISIS. So that's a fundamental truth that we really can't escape. So that's why we're there. But we don't want to be there forever. Okay, we want to help our partner nation actually overcome their own obstacles. And so on the ground, from a more tactical perspective, we're working hand in hand with the partner force in Iraq. We worked with intelligence units, police units, as well as special forces units. We kind of did a whole mix. In Afghanistan, we worked with primarily just special forces units, Afghan version of that. And we're creating those special forces units. We're making them who they are. We're training with them. We go on missions with them. We help them through planning so that eventually we're just not there. It takes time, though. It doesn't happen overnight, as I think a lot of people would like it to. So people ask, why are there Thai Navy SEALs saving people in caves in Thailand? And why are they called Navy SEALs? It's because we trained them over the years, and there's actually Navy SEALs all over the world.
On another note, I see the comments and I'm reading them as we go. And Louis, that's a really great question. We'll definitely get to that. And Dr. Janey, I see that one too. And David Balat, yes, we will play basketball. That is a promise.
No, we're not. I'm not playing basketball.
Well, he said Lurie owes me a game. All right.
Yeah, okay.
David.
I'll watch. Yeah, you guys play.
I'm in. Winner gets to play this guy. Okay.
I'm so bad. I mean, I'm not going to do something. I'm so bad at it.
We're gonna film that.
No, that's why I don't never.
All right. So sticking to the policy question, do you think that our military, our armed forces, has achieved those goals in the Iraq and the Afghanistan campaigns?
Well, I mean, in my broader mission, which was don't let them come here. Yes. I mean, and again, that's kind of the public message we need to keep delivering, because it's so important that people understand that. We never did a great job of defining that over the years. Why are we there? What's the mission? And I wish the president, whether it was Bush, whether it was Obama, or now it's Trump, the mission should always be prevent them from coming here. It's just that simple. But we got wrapped around like, okay, do we want a sustainable solution? We want a nation built. We want a self-sustaining government. We want a democracy. Now you're really getting complicated. Okay, and you're almost striving to achieve impossible goals, at least in the short term. Anything's achievable in the long term with enough resources, but Americans get impatient with these things.
On a lighter note, I think in any kind of extended, often difficult situations, I wonder if they can hear that scratching on that.
You want to get them out?
No, don't. It's fine. They're often funny situations. I mean, I'm sure you're all the different deployments you've had. Of course, it's stressful, it's difficult, it's dangerous. Yeah. But anything that's truly notable, it's really funny that you could share, and a lighter touch about it.
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier. It's hard.
I gave him a heads up. I'd ask that
because I have to combine funny with appropriate.
Okay.
And that's why it's such a hard question.
We'll come back to it. All right.
I'll say. I mean, I'll kind of give you a general, insight into the way we think. Mm-hmm. And it's this. Okay, so ask the question. So you're running around in the mountains in the middle of the night. You're wearing night vision goggles. So sometimes it's hard to see what's right in front of you. People trip and fall a lot. And and I always ask people, like, when your buddy trips and falls in front of you, like, what do you do? And normal people are like, well, I'll probably help them up.
No. When it's your friends, you laugh. Yeah. When it's a stranger, you help them.
Make sure you point and you laugh. You make sure he knows what he did, and then you help him up. And that kind of encompasses the SEAL teams, and it's a very, I would say, it's a lighthearted community, because you have to keep it that way. With kind of the intensity of situations that you face. So, I mean, it's a dark sense of humor, but it's a very close-knit community, because everybody has that sense of humor. You keep it light, and you push forward through hard situations with that.
I just learned recently that Dan met President Obama when he was president. Okay. And could you describe the meeting and where it was and what the exchange was, if you have a good memory of it?
Yeah. So I met him because I was in the hospital. I was this is right after I was blown up, and as pretty much all presidents do, nobody really knows about this, because they really try to keep it under the radar.
Were you in Walter Reed?
Yeah, they'll do their tour through the Walter Reed Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, and it's the Wounded Warrior Ward, and they just come by and shake hands with all the guys who've been hurt. And so he came by and I stood up, friendly guy. I asked him to sign something for me, and my other buddy, a SEAL, he says, "Hey Dan, I know you can't read that because you're blind, but because I was totally pretty much blind at the time, I could see a little bit at this point." He's like, "Hey Dan, I know you can't read what the president's writing, but he said, quit complaining and get back to work." So the president kind of turns to my buddy. He's like, I wouldn't trust that guy if I were you. So I can't do an Obama voice, but that's what he said. I want to give the main message of this story. So I disagree with pretty much everything Obama ever did. Obama's policies of this, we'll call it hypersensitivity to any kind of PR disaster in Afghanistan. It forced down policies and it forced down a way of thinking that led us on kind of a silly mission that day. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not a victim story, don't get me wrong, because if there's a chance to go into battle, we go, and we're happy to do it. So it's not something I really feel bad about at all. But when you're thinking about broader policy, do you really need to send guys boots on the ground to assess damage in the middle of nowhere? No, you don't. Okay, and I'll say that General Mattis has specifically countered that idea during his tenure as Secretary of Defense. So very different way of thinking. That being said, you always stand up for the president and you always respect the president, period. And we've seemed to have completely forgotten that. And heck, we forgot it when Bush was president too. It just seems like that's the way of the world these days. And it's an unfortunate reality. So you always stand for the president. You always respect the president because he represents an office. And and I wish the other side would look at it that way too. You can disagree politely, but you don't have to claim a lot of the nonsense that's being claimed these days.
All right, last question about being a Navy SEAL, and then we'll get to some of the questions that I see here on Facebook. But after your injury, when did you decide you wanted to deploy again? And then most notably, what did Tara say when you say, I want to deploy again? Because you had 2 deployments post-injury, is that correct?
Yeah, well, I decided right away. So that was, if anything, it was we definitely decided right away as if there was no other option. And that reality kind of checked us as we went on, because there's different kinds of deployments, right? And so there's a deployment where you go back with the platoon and you'd probably be back in Afghanistan, leading men on operations. That became an impossible option. It wasn't allowed to happen, but we obviously have different kind of mission sets that are a little more difficult to describe, and those are the kind of deployments I ended up doing. So when the kind of deployments I did were to places like Bahrain, where we did some work in Lebanon and Oman, places like that, but you're not necessarily getting shot at or blown up. So Tara totally understood, and she comes from a Navy family. She's a Navy brat, moved all over the U.S. and the world, following her dad around during his Navy career. So it was great to have a partner in this who really understood everything and how much it means to us to deploy. It's for SEALs.
You chose wisely.
Yeah,
that's what it is. Okay, let me get to Louis LaRota's question. It's a long one, so let me see if I can kind of.
It's the gist.
Give you the gist of it. Okay, so as you might be aware, you want to join the Tier 1, the A committees, Energy and Commerce, Appropriations. There is kind of this said rule. It's not even unsaid. It's pretty much out in the open. Yeah. If you want to be in this seat, you need to raise X dollars per quarter, per month, per year, whatever it might be. With that in mind, which committees would you want to be interested in? And if it's one of those Tier 1 committees, will you play ball, or will you be willing to be the guy who's going to say, you know what, it's not worth it. I'm going to do my own thing. If I'm ostracized, that's what happens. What do you think?
Somebody's been watching The Swamp. Was it this? What is
I think it was on Netflix. I thought it was on Netflix because I've seen it too.
The Swamp. It's on the internet. I don't know. It's an interesting show.
Yeah, he said it's called The Swamp.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's The Swamp. I'm reading that too wrong. Yeah. It is. That's what The Swamp is. Literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
Maybe not literally.
That is. Well, I think it is quite literally.
Houston's more of a swamp.
Yeah.
Literally.
So is the DC area. It is quite literally a swamp.
Oh, shows what I know.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, let me start off with just priorities. The priorities for your committee should reflect the priorities for policy. And since my priorities for policy are border security, flood mitigation, infrastructure, and then I think in the longer term, entitlement reform. And I frame this as my generation's issue that we're going to have to fix this excessive entitlement spending, excessive mandatory spending side of things.
The deficits, absolutely.
Yeah. So, talking about committees, we're looking at something like Homeland Security, maybe transportation, because of the Army Corps of Engineers, but I don't know if it's necessary to jump on that committee just to oversee the Army Corps of Engineers. I think you have some influence on that just by being from this area. So Homeland Security is one I'm starting to look at. Armed Services Committee for obvious reasons, and then in the future Ways and Means. Ways and Means is it's quite a reach to get that right away as a freshman, but those are the things that I'd be looking at over the long term. And the question of do you play ball or do you just fight the man? No, you play ball because that's what's going to help your constituents. You raise the money. I can go on TV and on the show The Swamp and complain about it, or I can just do my job and get it done. I wish it were different. I do. And maybe in the long term, we can look at ways on how that might be different. But,
term limits.
You could look at term limits. I'm supportive of term limits. There's pros and cons to that. You got to have a pretty honest conversation about what that would mean, and if that would even fix this.
It's a good point.
It's actually unclear that would fix this at all.
It's not direct correlation. That's true.
Yeah. So that's a hard question to answer, but honestly, you do in the end. What should drive you is what is going to be better for your constituents, and your constituents don't benefit at all from you just kind of raising hell as an outsider, getting nothing done. That's for sure. All
right, let's talk about the campaign. Besides winning, what was your favorite moment? Let's just talk about
sitting next to you at every forum.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll take that as an answer.
Yeah.
Good answer.
Next.
Good answer. Next question. All right. So if you would go back, let's say, I don't remember, it was early November, what day it was, when Ted Poe, our congressman, made his announcement he's retiring.
Mm-hmm.
If you can go back to that, is there anything that you would do differently?
Just campaigning wise?
It could be anything. It could be an interview that you wish you didn't do, or besides this one. Yeah. Or it could be a strategy.
When's this going to be over?
Anything?
We lost thousands of votes because we didn't have really the money or foresight, expertise. We were running a mom and pop shop campaign in the primary. We didn't mail to senior citizens who do ballot by mail. This is kind of this is a very specific thing.
That's right.
I mean, that is the one mistake we made.
It's a huge deal. If you look at the early returns, those numbers, it was for the two campaigns that had all the early cash. It was Kevin who was able to move his state money, his state.
Yeah, they had infrastructure in place.
Yeah, they all had the infrastructure, and that was able. They could put those mailers out, and those are expensive mailers.
Yeah.
It's not just a simple postcard. It's expensive. And so that's a big deal. Okay, that's it.
Everything else, I think, went great.
I like this question from Josh here. He says, Dan, you are a young Republican.
Mm-hmm.
What could be the major bipartisan initiatives of the next Congress? Oh, well, I'm sorry. I'm reading two at the same time. I didn't see these come in. Okay. Josh said, what are your plans to deal with the impending student loan crisis?
I mean, you have to start getting government out of it. I'm not going to get into specifics on how to do that. We haven't gone into depth on what that was. I was just listening to a Cato podcast about that issue on the way here right now. But you have to slowly start getting government out. So it's combined getting government out of the system, which inflates costs as it is, combined with a cultural shift in this understanding that you have to go to college. So the podcast I was listening to had a really interesting story, and the guy being interviewed, and he runs some apprenticeship company, which, by the way, is just the absolute direction we need to go. He runs some kind of apprenticeship program where students pay into it, but they get paid. So in the end, you kind of come out neutral, but you're working, you're getting experience. It's a great model. But what he thought was interesting was that when students are looking at his program, they're looking at every dollar spent, like, oh, I'm not sure if this is a good deal for me, and they're acting like a consumer. Okay, that's a normal way to act. But when then they say, well, I'm not so sure. Maybe I'll just do a 4-year degree. Well, they don't ask those same questions. They don't count pennies, right? They're not counting every dollar. They're not trying to figure out where every dollar goes. So it's just this interesting mindset we have in America where a college degree is worth it at any cost. That's a cultural shift that has to change.
It is changing now. Sure.
The conversation is definitely happening. And, so this kind of feeds into that bipartisan talk. I mean, there should be some bipartisan agreement that trade skills are important. Those kind of vocational programs are important. Apprenticeships are something that we should pursue. Maybe, we can follow some successful models that we see around the world and that we see here in Houston. I mean, there's some great private sector models that work quite well. So I think that's the long-term solution.
Other questions coming in. This one from James. What do you believe could be the major bipartisan initiative of the next Congress? Is it from that nice lady in Queens?
Yeah, yeah.
Abolish ICE?
I'm sure I agree on just about anything.
Anything we're saying.
It sounds like at least Democrats and Republicans are both on board now with abolishing federal agencies. Now we disagree with which federal agencies, but it looks like. So I would go right back to what I was just talking about on bipartisan legislation is the trade skills. Now how you do that, I think it's probably through incentivizing apprenticeships and things like that. But
the Democrats used to be the party of the blue-collar worker.
Yeah,
back in the day. Yeah. Not anymore. What is the number one issue for Houston voters in our district in this coming general election? Because it's a lot different than we just experienced, I think, maybe in the primary. What's your opinion?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it'll continue to be flooding. I feel like that was probably the primary one in the primary, the primary one in the primary. Primary. Okay. Yeah. And I think it'll continue to be. Those wounds have not healed. People want to know there's a plan in place. And I think that is formulating. And I think I'm happy to see sort of that regional coordination that we're always talking about. It's not happening as fast as everyone would like, but it is happening. So I think that'll continue to be the issue. And, I'll continue to tell voters, compare the way we talk about flooding and see who has a better grasp of it, see who's really done more of a thorough job looking into this issue and looking for ways to solve it. And between me and my current opponent, I think the answer is pretty clear.
Speaking about your current opponent, the thing that I think many of us are wanting to see is the debate. Will there be a debate? And if there is, can I host it?
You should definitely.
I would love to host it. That would never ever happen.
There is one. I can't remember the date.
You don't know the date?
It's on Univision.
It's gonna be. Is it in Spanish?
It should be.
It should be in Spanish.
Yeah.
Is it?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I wish I.
Is it in September or October?
I don't want to.
You'll let us know.
I'm not sure.
Is it just one debate scheduled, or we're gonna have multiple?
There'll probably be a couple.
There should be like Kingwood High School, then do one on the west side, then maybe the Champions area, and then maybe a Med Center. Do a traveling road show.
We could. I mean, we'll see. I mean, I know we're gonna have I think we might even have more than one scheduled.
I hope we have. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. In 2024, when I run for president, if I ask you to be my vice president, will you say yes?
I mean, if you win the primary.
Okay.
Sure.
We're just playing with you. All right. Let's see. Dr. Janie says she lives.
Hi, Dr. Janie.
She lives in the city of Houston, Lake Houston. What are your plans to help with the post-Harvey recovery, cleaning the lake, dredging, maintenance, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. Well, Dr. Janie knows me very well, and we talk about this a lot. So that's the Lake Houston area has specific problems and solutions, and it's different from the rest of the district. For Lake Houston in particular, I always describe it as a water flow problem, and that's where I've always been advocating for kind of a new plea for 3, which I think now has become the hashtag DDG. The hashtag DDG is dredge detention gates. And that's about right. That's effectively what I've talked about through my research and through talking to the experts over time. Those are the 3 solutions that I've laid out. Detention means actually Montgomery County. Okay, that means all the tributaries that lead into Lake Houston, so that there's simply less water flow coming into Lake Houston, so it doesn't get backed up. When it does arrive, you need to have the San Jacinto dredge so that there's actually capacity for that water to flow out. Cleaning Lake Houston's important, but we have to remember that Lake Houston empties and refills 20 times during an event like Harvey.
Mm-hmm.
So the important part is that it has somewhere to go quickly, and that's where the gates come in.
Let's talk about something we both have degrees in, right? International relations.
Yeah.
The big topic du jour, of course, was Russia. But I want to look at it from a different angle. And something interesting that I think is kind of understated is that Russia, well, although we talk about it contemporaneously, that it's looking to become the Soviet Empire again. I mean, is that true? I don't know. What I heard, I don't know if this is true, but I heard that the marginal tax rate in Russia is 16%, 1/6. So you could argue, well, who's more capitalist, right? Who's more socialist if you look at it in that metric, if that number is accurate? And so I want to ask you, why are we such adversaries? If we look at Russia's human rights records, they're not comparable in terms of they're not nearly as bad as some of our allies, which is true.
Yeah.
If you look at the values, you could say the Christian values of that country.
Yeah.
It's not that different from us, particularly compared to, let's call it Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations.
Yeah.
So why are we so far apart when we should be much, much closer?
Well, okay. Let's hit each one of those points. I don't think Russia's a socialist society anymore. I think they're an oligarchy.
It's very much an oligarchy.
Right. So that's still ideologically very much opposed to a liberal Western democracy. I think that the human rights record is debatable. Maybe you're comparing it with, say, Saudi Arabia. But I mean, Russia. They shot down a passenger jet. They killed their political adversaries on the streets of Britain. They invade and demolish towns in Chechnya. So I think they have a pretty bad human rights record. I think what you might be getting at though is this kind of, if you just go hang out with a bunch of Russians, okay, you've got a lot. They're not that different from you. I mean, there's definitely cultural differences. They're Europeans, but there's not a very good reason culturally why we should be so diametrically opposed, and that's absolutely right. But there's the simple fact is that there's vast geopolitical differences in interests and national interests, and that just kind of continues to bubble to the surface. Just ever since the Cold War ended, that never really changed. The idea that and Putin is just the idea that Putin has kind of brought to the surface again is not so much the resurgence of communism. I don't think he believes that would help him very much, but it's the resurgence of the empire and kind of the satellite states that surround Russia, and so that's why you see an invasion of Georgia and the invasion of the Ukraine, and what we hope we won't see is continued encroachment. What's next? Is it Estonia? Is it Lithuania? Where they have these major Russian. So you can very easily envision a situation where you have a Russian population, ethnically Russian population in one of these sovereign states. And Russia does a very similar thing like it did in Crimea. If we won't stand up for international norms, then literally nobody will. And that's kind of why
frankly we haven't. To be totally honest,
no, we haven't. And I can't think of one president who's done a good job of it. Frankly, we have to be honest about that. Nobody is doing the right thing. Actually, President Trump's actions have actually been very forceful. His rhetoric has been the opposite. So it's a mixed bag there. But his actions have actually been quite good, and a much improved version of the Obama presidency. Same with North Korea. But again, rhetoric matters too, and that's they're almost canceling each other out. So that's a problem, but that's correctable. That's correctable, and so I mean that's why it's geopolitical reasons. It's not cultural, right? Like you talking about Saudi Arabia? Well, geopolitically we align pretty well, but on a cultural level, no, not at all. Heck, even if you look at Iran, culturally, you're gonna be able to sit across the table from an Iranian and probably have a better conversation than I think your typical Gulf Arab. But geopolitically, they're so opposed to us that we have no choice but to be adversaries. So It is. Sometimes it's counterintuitive because, and we wish it weren't so, but it is.
Before we go back to foreign policy, I want to ask you this question from Louis about Veterans Affairs. And what would you do as a congressional representative, a member of Congress, to ensure that we aren't leaving our veterans behind? I know it's something that's very near and dear to your heart for the obvious reasons. And then what would you do when one of your constituents calls and they're having trouble with the VA and they're being stonewalled or whatever the heck it might be? What can you do to help?
Well, as most congressmen do have, that is part of that is part of the job. I mean, you should, if people are having trouble with a federal agency, that's one good reason why you have a member of Congress and a representative there for you. So that goes without saying. What do you do to fix the VA? That's a much more complicated question. There was some recent legislation passed that was highly bipartisan and overall pretty good. It shifted towards a more of a reliance on the private enterprises and private care in order to kind of just take up some of that backlog that we see in the VA. The problems with the VA are this. You've got it's owned by public sector unions. Or owned isn't quite the right word, but I think you know what I mean.
That may change very soon.
Yeah, we've reduced the power of them. It doesn't mean that those contracts still don't exist, and it doesn't necessarily make it any easier to hire and fire somebody, which is the real problem. It's accountability. So it's the problem whether it's the VA, it's the problem whether it's the EPA, it's the problem whether it's the DoD. It doesn't matter what federal agency we're talking about. That's always a problem because 99 out of 100 people are great, but if you have a business full of 100 people and you have one bad apple, what does that do to your business? I mean, it messes things up. That's an important cog in the machine. But you can replace that person. See, the VA can't very easily. So that's when I go through and when I feel like I'm getting bogged down for my care, it's usually because there's just 1 or 2 points of failure, just somebody not doing their job. So that's an issue. The right balance of availability for private care and the physical infrastructure the VA already has, I think is a good place to move to. And the last thing I'll say is, which isn't really the job of the VA, but the job of us as a society and as veterans, as you get out, make sure we need to help each other find that purpose. There's a lot of good nonprofits out there that I think shift towards this, but that transition from the military to the private sector, I think a lot of vets get out and they think it'll be so easy, and that's wrong. Sometimes it's hard to translate those skills over, and it's certainly hard to find that sense of mission again, and vets get lost in that, I think, and lost in this place where they've lost that sense of mission. And again, the happiest people on this earth are ones with a purpose. And whether you're talking about veterans or talking about the poor or anybody, helping people find their purpose and dignity and kind of light at the end of the tunnel in this life, that is the fundamentally the most important thing for our society. And that kind of leads into welfare policy, it leads into veterans policy, it leads into everything.
All right, go back to foreign policy. Let's talk about North Korea. You spent some real time in South Korea, right? You're deployed there. I watched what's going on with the summit and everything else, and the differing definitions or not defined yet about denuclearization. What do you think the end game for the North Korean leadership is? And what do you think they're really hoping to accomplish in the next short, medium, long term, whatever it might be? What do you think?
Well, their stated end game is reunification under their terms. So if it were, and survival, of course, but
survival of them.
Survival, yeah, their survival.
Just their survival.
Not everybody else. They don't
everybody else, whatever. You're on your own.
So it's survival and reunification. So which kind of explains why they're so intent on having nuclear weapons, because it's hard to reunify a peninsula on your terms if you don't have the real power to do so. Now, I think a lot of people in the military would argue that wouldn't necessarily be enough, unless you just destroy the other side. That wouldn't be enough to actually reunify it under their terms. But try and get into their heads a little bit. They're not like us. Okay, so they don't necessarily think the way we do.
See, I argue very strongly that they are highly rational actors.
Yeah, their actions are. If those are their end goals, reunification. That's why they have.
And I would say
that's why they do what they do.
I'd argue that their actions, their goal here is to become a larger, because they're already a pretty big player, but a larger player in the world arms market. What's their number one export?
Yeah.
It's arms. And a lot of these test firing of missiles was a sales demonstration to say, hey, buy our missiles. Look at them.
Yeah.
They work. That's what it is.
Right.
And now they're trying to
customers
lower
in places like Syria and Iran. I mean,
That's right.
Yeah.
Or how do they even get the nuclear weapons?
they're kind of like an
Pakistan.
international criminal organization. And they make counterfeit money too.
It's essentially a Bond villain is really what it is. All we're missing is Tom Jones in the background.
That's about right. And so, what's the way forward with that? I mean, it's we can be optimistic that maybe we'll get somewhere, but the reality is that we've seen these games played before by them. I think the real answer is I want to see the Trump administration go right back to its policy of pretty intense pressure from all sides. It's actually the only administration in recent history to have successfully put economic pressure, military pressure, diplomatic pressure all at once successfully, which got North Korea back to the table. But my concern is that we let up prematurely. So.
Especially my concern is South Korean leadership is too quick to give away the store.
They are too, yeah. I mean, you've got a very different South Korean leadership right now. Some South Korean regimes, you're actually trying to hold them back because you don't want them to start anything. And now it's completely the opposite. So
give away the store. Let me go to Cordell Rodriguez's question. And he asks you, Dan, he says if, but I say when you win, are you going to publicly address Mayor Turner on why he denied twice to Governor Abbott multi-million-dollar Harvey funds, relief, rehabilitation, I can't say that, you know what I'm saying, money for the city of Houston and Harris County and all the surrounding cities and counties? In other words, will you step up to Mayor Turner and say, take the money the governor is offering you?
Yeah, there's probably more to that specific story, but I mean, the reality is if we've got the federal money and it's not being used correctly here in the Houston area, then damn right we're going to fight for that.
Let's go back to, I like this one also. We're talking foreign policy. How do we afford our continual foreign aid and forward deployed military to contain Russia and China? Where would you suggest we make cuts, if you suggest we make cuts at all?
When you talk about foreign aid, and so those are two separate things: foreign aid and national defense.
I meant to say "and" somewhere there. I should have put in an "and." Yeah.
No, I mean, I understand the question. So we don't spend nearly as much as people think on foreign aid. As long as we're spending it wisely and we're using it the way it's meant to be used, which is leverage. And are we spending it in our national interest? And I think that's something that should be looked at annually. There's I think there rightfully so there are debates about this depending on which country we're talking about, as there should be. But the benefits of it need to be clear too. I'm not on the side of just get rid of all foreign aid. Sometimes it does serve our national interest. Sometimes
particularly it's tied to things. You say we'll give you $100 million, but you need to buy $45 million worth of American products.
Right.
Is that correct? That's another conversation. But
yeah, is that the right thing to do? And I would argue there's probably a good middle ground there. It's because it leads into other problems of corporate cronyism and things like that. But in the end, I don't have a huge problem with helping our companies compete with foreign companies. Trying to pick winners and losers here in the United States, I think it's a terrible idea for the government to do. But pushing our agenda abroad.
Solyndra.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the other question is national defense. Where do you cut spending there? You need to revamp the acquisition process and look at the way we do budgeting in Congress so that the DoD can actually look ahead and anticipate contracting and there's a lot of problems with continuing resolutions and how that affects the Department of Defense. So I think that's the first step. There's plenty of waste that happens that we should be tackling and working on eliminating. That has nothing to do with tackle that before we start cutting bases here and there, I would say.
All right, one last question for me, and maybe we'll get one more from the comments section. But let's talk about China and trade, one of my favorite topics in the world. Frankly, it's real simple. Do you agree with Trump's strategy and Trump's tariffs?
Well, I think tariffs are the problem with tariffs is you're kind of setting us both on fire to reach a goal. And if the goal is opening up China's markets to U.S. businesses, then that's great. But I would like to make sure that's the goal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not completely clear to me that it is. Something I talk about too is, the U.S. has a 100% success rate in winning disputes against China within the WTO. So use that route. That's obviously a good route for us. It's worked before.
But what about opening that Chinese market? 25% tariff on our autos into China. Isn't that too high? What's the Chinese rate going in? I believe for them to come here, I think it's 2%. Why they get 2% and we get 25%?
I agree, it's not fair, but these tariffs are hurting Texans. That's the problem. And you're taking it. You're setting us both on fire.
But if you want to. Here's the part where we can agree to disagree. I love the strategy. I will push for it as hard as Trump wants for it. The only way it's going to work for future generations is we have to fix it now. Short-term gain for long-term pain.
Let me ask you this, though.
I said that wrong. I said that wrong. Short-term pain for long-term gain.
The trade deficit. Do you at least agree that that's not a good measure of who's winning and losing? Because it's not. It's not. It simply means we're buying more. The tariffs are an issue, but attack the tariffs, and if we want to attack some of the subsidization that goes on in China, I think that's totally valid as well.
But how do you do that?
But you can put sanctions on state-owned companies. You can target a little bit better. You can target a little bit more strategically than these broad tariffs that are quite literally going to hurt us here. And that's what I have a problem with it with. Because it's a tax. Tariffs are a tax on us. That's what it ends up being.
All right. I'm going to take Josh's question, but change it a little bit. And this is the final question we're going to talk about. Article 5, the NATO treaty. Mm-hmm. All right. One attacked, all is attacked. Yep. Mutual defense and the like. Montenegro is did I read this correct here? I don't remember reading about Montenegro, but I guess they're on the news.
Yeah.
Sorry if I missed that. So some of these members of NATO, and they get attacked by Russia. Mm-hmm. Do you think America should be out there defending Montenegro and some of these other countries?
Yes. That's the whole point of NATO. So, backing away from this is a very dangerous step. We were just talking about Russia and what their goals are. So, and so the background on this is, and I can't remember Trump's exact words, but he sort of indicated, because when Trump talks, he's sort of kind of free flowing, like it's a stream of consciousness. He indicated that he may not, if something like Montenegro, just throw out kind of a hypothetical, does it make sense for Americans to step in? Or you know what? Tucker Carlson asked him that. Because Tucker tends to lean on the libertarian side, where America shouldn't be a leader in the world anyway. So I understand kind of the basis of that question, and that's a dangerous path to take. The entire point of NATO is to have a deterrence, where if we have set a very clear line, if you cross this line, there will be hell to pay. Mm-hmm. If you back away from that, you're seriously shifting the global sense of order, and you are implicitly giving Russia permission to do whatever it wants to do with those Russian populations I talked about in other countries. Now, if you believe that that's fine, and if you believe that Russia should be allowed to expand its power and influence and continue to rebuild the Soviet Empire, to no benefit to us whatsoever and to no benefit to our European allies, then by all means, let Montenegro out to dry. I would give you this one last fact. The only time Article 5 has ever been invoked was by us, when we brought everybody to help us in Afghanistan. We have to take a stronger stance in support of NATO. All right. We have to take a stronger stance. Well, or I think we're taking a strong enough stance, but a strong stance on getting NATO to pay up, helping them understand the importance of the alliance, and that America is not their sole benefactor. And Trump's doing a good job of that. And maybe when he says things like this, it's meant to kind of spook his allies into a little bit more of, I think, cooperation with us and getting us where we need to be. And I think that's completely fine. I think calling out Germany about their deal in the Russian pipeline is probably completely fine. So let's call these things out. But stand by NATO, stand by the entire premise of NATO and the kind of the upstanding of liberal Western democracy. I think that's important.
Okay. Well, last things. Anything you want to plug before we go?
Anything I want to plug?
Yeah, that's what we always do. Plugs.
What does that mean?
We do plugs at the end. You
What's
know,
a
you're gonna,
plug?
yeah,
Like,
where are you gonna be? Have it come in contact with you. What's your website? What's your next event?
Yeah.
These are your plugs, Dan.
Okay. I didn't know.
Dan is
familiar with
obviously
this terminology. Is this New York terminology?
It's
Is this in New York? You just
this
vote
was,
for Dan Crenshaw in November. All right. Let's keep the House. Let's make sure Nancy Pelosi doesn't come take over the House. And let's support our president. And let's make our country stronger. So vote November. Go to CrenshawForCongress.com. You can donate there. You can check out our events.
What's your next event? What's your next event, Dan?
I have nothing to announce right now.
He's got too many going on.
Yeah.
Let's see. Don't forget to donate to him. Next episode will be former retired Shell president John Hofmeister will be on Tuesday night, back to 6:30 p.m. July 24th. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you very much for your questions. Thank you to my future vice president, Mr. Dan Crenshaw. Thank you, Dan. All right, give it here. All right, we did it again. All right, thank you all. Thank you all for watching. Oh, and then always.